I'll tell you, it's kind of an unusual talk. The book that I wrote is really a history, a short summary of some of the more popular theaters that we've had in Northern Kentucky over the years. The video presentation, though, goes into a little bit more detail on some of the big movies that were out, some of the changes in movie history. So it's a little bit of everything. And it is audience participation. So if you have some questions or comments, we'll take them. But we'll get started in this here. Just a summary. Of course, this is not not meant to be a complete history. If you're looking for the whole history of the Madison Theater, that's going to take some more research on your part. I'm sure I've left a few of the theaters out, but this will be a nice little summary for you. At one time, of course, neighborhood theaters were everywhere in Northern Kentucky. There were no megaplex cinemas like we have today. Everyone traveled by foot or bicycle. They were mostly right down the streets. We saw a feature film, sometimes a double feature, and also some weekly favorites like the Keystone Cops and Our Gang, Three Stooges. The adults had the newsreels from 1929 into the 1960s. The neighborhood theater was a place you could go to forget about your daily headaches. These were some of the first businesses to have air conditioning. As a matter of fact, the State Theater in Newport advertised that they had the coldest air conditioning in all of Northern Kentucky. They did very little advertising because everyone just knew where they were. These wonderful movie houses were likely the first places that you saw your first Walt Disney film or had your first romantic date. How many people had their first romantic date at a movie? Of course they did. And also had your first taste of movie theater candy and hot buttered popcorn. Some of the favorites up there. Today's outline, we're going to talk about theaters as they were in the late 1800s, the introduction of moving pictures, the heyday of local movie theaters, and the neighborhood theater's demise, of course. The early history, the very first theaters were live performance venues, stage plays, dramas. Vaudeville was huge in Northern Kentucky as well as most of the country. I was a little surprised to find that we had prize fights going on in the theaters in the late 1800s. Comedy routines, of course, and opera. Newport's big theaters in the late 1800s were the Red Man Hall, the Stat, the Music Hall, and the Grand Theater. Covington had the Oddfellows Hall there at 5th and Madison, the Covington Theater, the Pavilion, the Park Air Dome, which was an outdoor facility, and the Lyric. I have two clips of vaudeville acts just to try to bring of course I always like when there's some teenagers in the audience, but that's okay. These were, of course, huge. As I said, comedy routines were by far the favorites, followed quickly by animal acts. And of course, these are videos of stage plays that we had. The realistic inebriates. Where else could you go to see an animal act like this? I'm sure the bicycle and baboon brought a lot of tickets. brought back vaudeville, I might go see one. The variety shows were all the rage from the late 1800s, but a question I've always been asked is, where was Northern Kentucky's very first theatrical performance? Well, Covington and Newport were certainly booming towns in the late 1800s, but Washington, now a part of Maysville, in 1797 had the first theatrical performance west of the Alleghenies. The early 1800s, Junius Booth, of course the father of John Wilkes Booth, was a regular performer in Maysville. Which brings us to moving pictures. Live entertainment remained popular into the 1920s, but silent films were first introduced in the late 1800s. Single reel technology didn't really exist until the early 1900s, however, and local theaters began converting their theaters to include screens. In 1916 was the first time, based on the local city directories at the library, that there was actually a category of businesses for moving theater, moving pictures. And as you all remember, no one's in here old enough, but the silent movies all had the dialogue blocks. These audiences were absolutely amazed with these movies that before sound. Musical accompaniments soon followed. Some of the theaters had small orchestras, or most had a lone pianist. Some had special effects operators, and some theaters had far better piano players. I've interviewed several people saying that there might be two theaters showing the same picture, but they would go to this one because they had a better organ player. So silent film examples, we've got a couple of those. One with no musical accompaniment at all, and one with a piano accompaniment. And again, put yourself back into the 1920s, and of course we're amazed today at movies with spectacular sound effects and Dolby stereo with 50 speakers in the room. But check out this first movie with no audio accompaniment at all. This is The Desert Rider from 1923. You notice the good guy has the white hat and the white horse. So.
White gaze.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You would think you would be just bored to sleep watching an hour and a half movie like this, but nope.
Nope.
What kind of difference music makes? This is The Wizard of Oz from 1910. Music got scary to me. I know, it's amazing special effects in that one. Which brings us to talkies. Well, some missed the iconic piano accompaniments, but my favorite part of the research was a newspaper reporter went to see his first talking picture. And he reports in the newspaper, quote, "You can actually hear the actor's dialogue at the very instant it happens on the screen." It's like a miracle. Live performance theaters declined immediately after talkies came along. The Jazz Singer is not really the first talkie, but it's historically recognized as the first talking picture. And we have a little clip from that. It actually had a mixture of dialogue blocks as well as talking. And again, put yourself back into the 1920s and 30s, and it had to be amazing to actually hear his voice when he starts singing. The 1920s into the mid-1930s was an absolute explosion in the popularity of the neighborhood movie theater. Covington would have as many as 25 at one time. Newport had more than a dozen. And there were others in Erlanger, Latonia, Ludlow, Dayton, Bellevue. All the little cities had them. Carrollton, Maysville, of course. Kenton County have a few pictures of some of the early favorites. The Casino Theater, Pike Street near Madison, the Broadway, the Delby was out in Latonia. Campbell County, the Music Hall, the Sylvia, and the Highland in Fort Thomas. The State Theater and the Strand, two of the more popular theaters that stayed around for several decades. Absolutely blew my mind to map all of Covington's movie houses. That's just taking you from downtown out to 20th Street, but incredible. Just about every corner had one. Newport, not quite as many, but still. 1920s, a couple of the biggest movies to hit the theaters was the one on the left there, as you can see who was the producer. The production company was Edison. Al Bella was one. Charlie Chaplin in The Circus, big in the 1920s. 1930s, we had Frankenstein with Boris Karloff. Anything Goes with Bing Crosby, Ethel Merman. Advertising posters were in color, but the movies, of course, were still in black and white. Color movies, or movies with short color segments, were around before 1939, but two movies were released that same year that changed the movie-making world. The Wizard of Oz, starring Judy Garland, and Gone with the Wind. Imagine you've been watching black and white movies for the last 10, 15 years, and then you see this.
with the Wind has captured the imagination and acclaim of an entire world. The screen has never known a love story to compare with this. When Rhett Butler meets Scarlett O'Hara.
Beautiful. 1940s brought us The Wolfman with Bela Lugosi and Walt Disney's Fantasia. The 50s into the 70s, we see the beginning of the end of the neighborhood movie theater. The Dayview is still one of the only remaining structures around. Saratoga Printing works out of that space now. The Family Theater in Main Strasse is a music store. The Kentucky Theater still has the name Kentucky down the marquee if you're down in that area. If you're looking at it from Riddy's Corner this direction, you can still read the name Kentucky. The Madison, of course, has gone full circle from a live entertainment facility to a movie theater back to a live entertainment facility. And the Marianne, you didn't think we'd leave you out.
Nope, you can't.
And the Highland. The 1950s popular movies was Rear Window. Who saw Rear Window? Did you? You got one raised. And A Hollywood Story, Sunset Boulevard. And probably one of the most popular movies of the decade was Singing in the Rain. How many takes they had to do and how many times you had to change it back into dry clothes. 1960s was Breakfast at Tiffany's, Bonnie and Clyde. Oh boy, who saw Bonnie and Clyde in the theaters? By the 1970s, neighborhood movie theaters were closing rapidly. 2 reasons. Who wants to volunteer and tell me why? Television. Urban flight. City residents were moving to the suburbs, so who was going to come to the theater and watch the movie? And the popularity of television, so many channels, movies, watch movies from the comfort of your own home. Rapid decline in the smaller neighborhood theaters. Many closed before 1975. The larger ones were able to stick it out a little bit longer. The Madison, the State, Liberty, Hip, Strand. Those in the suburbs, the Gaiety in Ellesmere became the Village Cinema, and they remained open maybe into the 80s. Those away from downtown Newport and Covington remained a little bit larger, as I mentioned, the Gaiety. Bellevue's Marianne, I don't know exactly when they closed, but they stuck it out longer than most. The drive-in theaters, the Dixie Drive-In, Pike 27, the Florence, and the Riverview remained popular until the late 70s and 80s. In 2017, all of the wonderful neighborhood theaters are all gone. Some buildings live on. We mentioned a couple of them. But the Madison, of course, the Family. The Shirley on Holman Street is a church. And Bellevue's Marianne may have life ahead. They keep saying, we keep hoping, keeping our fingers crossed. I understand the city purchased it in hopes that someone would come along with some finances. We won't look at this whole list, but I did want to show people the list of theaters that existed in Covington at one time. The Broadway, the Colonial, some of the more popular, the Kentuckian, Liberty, of course, and Latonia had 4 theaters at one time, I think is amazing, and Newport, Dayton Bellevue, and a few others. A lot of people mention the 4-Star Dixie up in Fort Mitchell, but it had a very short life. I want to say it was under 15 years. Today, we have the AMC Newport on the Levee, 20 screens. The Cinemark in Florence, 14 screens. Regal Cinemas, I think those are the cheaper ones, that's where I go. In Wilder, the Danbury, 10 screens there. Nothing at all like the neighborhood theaters used to be. Okay, so we're ready for the incredible sidebar story. Question is, where was the first moving picture theater in Northern Kentucky? I'm glad you asked that question. Frank E. Lanius, 1902, he purchased a Lubin movie-making machine and the silent film The Great Train Robbery. He had a partnership with Ed Beck, playing carnivals and such around the summer and fall in Kentucky and Indiana. In 1905, though, he returned to Covington with a brand new Edison exhibition machine. He continued his profession as a house painter, but he opened his home at night to patrons, charging 5 cents admission, literally in his living room. Pike Street near Craig, a little brownstone house he was renting there. People sat on wooden planks stretched between wooden crates, and the film was shown on a bed sheet.
Isn't that something?
He had top-notch special effects because his son took money at the door and then took his place behind the screen, where he used sandpaper and other implements to make the noises while the father ran the machine. Lanius operated the theater in his home for 2 years before relocating to a storefront 1 block to the east. This is one of the advertisements for a different theater, but it's again the same. This is 1907. But why is Frank Lanius important? Well, he's showing pictures in his home in 1905. There's a businessman from New York City who is in Cincinnati expanding his penny arcade business. He's putting in a Nickelodeon in Fountain Square. And someone tells him about this newfangled operation going on over in Covington. So he and his carpenter walk the suspension bridge. They walk up Madison. They walk up Pike Street. He later says in his autobiography, "I had heard from my manager that a man across the river in Covington, Kentucky had come up with a new idea in entertainment. I went there with him. It was on a Sunday. I never got such a thrill in my entire life. The show was given in an old brownstone house. A man came to the window and sold the tickets to the children. Then he came to the door to take the tickets. He then locked the door and went and ran the machine. The place was filled to suffocation. He said to his manager, 'This is the most remarkable thing I've ever seen.'" The man talked with Frank Lanius the following morning, finished his business in Cincinnati, then returned to New York. By the following Sunday, he had his own theater in New York City. And he says, "The first day we played, I think we were 7 or 8 people short of 5,000, and we didn't even advertise." Within 10 years, he owned dozens of theaters. He ran out of new films to show, so he bought Metro Pictures, soon took control of Goldwyn Studios, and formed what became MGM Studios. So who was this man who states that he never would have entered the movie-making business had it not been for a chance meeting in Covington, Kentucky? Was Marcus Lowe. Thank you. We are open for questions and all that good stuff. And I've got some books available. Proceeds, of course, go to the Kenton County Historical Society. Let's talk about the Mary Ann. You want my one and only memory of the Mary Ann? Yeah. Took a date there. She was way out of my league. And we pulled up and watched the movie. Couldn't even tell you what we watched. Got out of the movie and realized that I had locked the keys in my mom and dad's car. Had to call mommy and daddy to come.
Oh, mercy.
Me out. First and last date with her. So that was the Mary Ann. Any questions at all? I know this was a nice short summary for you, but I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, I did enjoy it.
Great.
Very nice.
Great. Thank you so much.
It's unbelievable the technological changes. It just sort of blows my mind, really, frankly.
Well, now today, you've got your iPhone or your iPad or your whatever this gizmo gadget is. You just press a couple of buttons, you can watch whatever movie you want to watch, I suppose.
I know, it's phenomenal.
But again, I tried to put myself back into that first time Gone with the Wind on the big screen to see that brilliant color must have just,
Yeah,
or sound. They must just thought it was some kind of witchery or something. Being able to hear them talk at the same time.
who was in the movie business out of Louisville? Wasn't there some guy out of Louisville that got involved in making a lot of the big movies, early movies,
I don't know.
that went out and became a part of the Hollywood scene? A producer?
It doesn't ring a bell to me, but very, very likely.
What I know about popcorn and movies.
Well, popcorn, it was kind of interesting, I didn't research this tremendously, but the live entertainment venues, you were never allowed to bring food or drinks into the live entertainment facilities. So people got smart when they started making, moving pictures. They were selling popcorn and other things out on the street vendors. And the theater owners finally, it took a few years for them to realize, hey, wait a minute, we're missing out on this money. So they brought the popcorn and everything into the theaters after that. But they were actually selling it out on the streets first. You would never bring food or drink into the theater, not into the theater.
Popcorn candy girl.
Is that right?
Yes, and I got it free.
Well, I hope so.
And he had to pay, so on a date when we were a little short, and when he was short, we went to the movies.
That's the movies,
area.
yeah. I think that, and it still amazes me today. It's, I would think, very common for the teenagers. If it's going to be a date night, it's a movie.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. It's been that way for 80 years.
How did you get interested in this yourself?
Well, I suppose as far as theaters go, I've just always been a fan of local history. I've written a few, working on books 5, 6, and 7 right now, but when the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky was being produced, they were looking for authors to take little subjects, and I took fires, I took theaters, and very quickly realized there was enough information to have its own little book. Same way with the fires, but there were probably, I don't know, John, 50, 60 authors that all contributed to that history of the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky that came out
2009, I think.
2009. So it's a nice big book. It's hard to read from cover to cover.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in learning a lot about Northern Kentucky, there's a ton of information in there.
It's bigger than the Encyclopedia of Kentucky, which was written in, I guess, 1992.
Okay. It's a great research material if you're interested in, and still available for purchase, I'm sure.
I have a copy of that.
Yeah.
Now, didn't you do one on the Beverly Hills fire too?
I did write a book on Beverly Hills Supper Club.
That's what I.
That was my best-selling book at this point in time.
We still have copies to
I
sell.
still have those available.
I saw it in the Joseph Beth bookstore. I don't know where they came from, but I saw one last Sunday or Sunday before
Is
that.
that right?
Yeah.
Okay. But that came out a few years ago.
We both,
I've just always been a fan of local history. That's always will.
you were at the Green County Senior Center, I think.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
We bought one.
Very good.
I spent quite a bit of time there at the Beverly Hills Supper Club.
All right.
Well, I was of course, Dick Schilling was a good personal friend of mine, and I had headed up the Sunday liquor sales in Northern Kentucky for all of the, mainly for the restaurants and the tavern owners, and because they were competing with Cincinnati. I was talking to the folks here earlier, and being a teetotaling Baptist, I couldn't figure out what did you want me to do this for. But they came to me, and Walt Dunleavy of the Chamber of Commerce, Dick Schilling, Mike Weber, Ben Bernstein and Shirley Bernstein, the Committee of 500, Claude Johnson and Bud Henry Jose, and Bill Schmedege, who was a state representative, and I have to be honest, I had an ulterior motive in doing it. I didn't really want to do it, but then I got to thinking about it, and why would I do this? And they convinced me on the economic side that it would be a tremendous benefit to them and that they were losing money. But my ulterior motive, I have to admit, was not all pure, because I was a very ambitious young man, and I wanted to run eventually statewide. I had the goal of basically of at that time of someday becoming governor. And but I knew Northern Kentucky had never had a constitutional office holder from either party for almost 70 some years. And so I thought, now how do you break the ice? So I studied all of that, being a government teacher and history teacher, and I come to the conclusion that, well, Northern Kentucky is basically Catholic, particularly in Kenton and Campbell counties. And I'm a little Baptist boy. And but the rest of the state, and in Northern Kentucky, at that time, the Democratic Party really controlled the whole state. But in Northern Kentucky, it was only about 3-1 or less Democrat. Whereas in the far western counties of Kentucky, they were like 30-1 Democrat, and Eastern Kentucky was about 25-1 Democrat. And so you couldn't get through the primary from Northern Kentucky because about 7 or 8 very popular Northern Kentuckians had run, I mean very popular people, and couldn't get through the primary. So I thought, now how do I get myself locked into the parochial Catholic vote? And I said, I know. I'll head up the Sunday liquor sales here in Northern Kentucky, and I'll become friends with all the tavern owners and be known up here. I said, now I won't do it anywhere else in the state, and I didn't, even though Louisville tried to get me to. But that gave me an inside there, and then I could go campaign in Western Kentucky and know that the Baptist thing was a big plus down there, and in Eastern Kentucky. And I sang. So every place I went, I sang, and singing as a politician is a big asset, I can tell you. Particularly when you can sing 16 Tons, or My Old Kentucky Home, or I'd Rather Have Jesus. And I sang all 3 of those songs in every county in the state of Kentucky. And that's how I became the first elected official for over 70 years as superintendent of education for the state of Kentucky. Now that's a little history there too. But it was so true back in those days, and the theaters were really magnificent. They were gathering points.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, gathering points.
A lot of political rallies in these theaters as well.
Well, Beverly Hills was the first place that I was president of the Education Association. And Bert Combs was running for governor. Julian Carroll was running for lieutenant governor. And but I organized over 350 school teachers to go to a dinner at Beverly Hills Supper Club. First time they'd ever been organized politically. And I was one of the founders of what's called KEPAC, originally it was called Kentuckians for Better Schools. And I served as Wendell Ford, Julian Carroll's, and Lyman Ginger's statewide education chairman. But Beverly Hills and Dick Schilling's was one of my key points. Even though I didn't drink, I was there and knew everybody in there, and it was just a great place for me to touch people and meet people that you had to meet to get elected. You know, does that make any sense?
Absolutely.
And I'm still doing it.
And kiss babies, right?
And kiss babies and sing.
Well, I know they're not going to kick us out of the room, but folks, I appreciate you all coming and spending some of your Saturday with us. If you're not familiar with the Kenton County Historical Society, we've got some information back there you can have. But hope to see you at a future event.
Thank you very much.
Get one of those.